ми трошки скоротимо нашу дискусію. Наші два гості, Іван Козленко та Андрій Халпахчі, матимуть бігти дуже скоро. Наші гості, я бачу, вже заходять. Hello. Okay. So I think we're all set. You can come on stage. Yeah, the stage is yours. So we're... Okay. Meravy, right?
You can speak about everything. Everything.
Okay, so I'd like to welcome on stage Shani, Krow, an interdisciplinary artist from the United States, as well as Meravy Ґеріма, director from the United States, Іван Козленко, who's the former director of Довженко Center, the biggest film archive in this country, and of course Андрій Халпахчі, who's the art director of Молодість Film Festival. And today we are going to discuss film archives, why we need them, who makes them, and everything around the topic. So please welcome on stage. Okay.
Добрий вечір. Good evening. Is it working? Yeah. Only one question. You know, when we started about 30 years ago, two official languages at our festival, English and Ukrainian, it was very difficult with our audience. We need translator from English to Ukrainian and so on. I'm very glad that now we have mostly our audience fluently speaking English. Can we continue in English, or you need Ukrainian translation, or we can speak Ukrainian and then to give the word for English. Is it English okay for everybody?
Perfect.
Great. Really great new generation in Ukraine. Not with our officials sometimes. This is a problem. Absolutely, as usually, you see. Yeah, okay, but it's some jokes, and now it's really, for me, very important themes that we have to discuss, to speak together about. Classical movies, not only American, but all over the world. I remember this era, this epoch, when I was very jealous to see French restoration, American restoration, Polish restoration. Today we spoke with Krzysztof Zanussi to find in our memory first Polish restoration of the film The Train by Jerzy Kawalerovich. For me it was something about really 30 years ago, at least, what we see on our 35 millimeters from the old Ukrainian movies. Something starting in Ukraine too. You know, we have the big part of classical movies at our festival. Really very good quality of restoration. For example, these classical movies we dedicated to 100th anniversary for the big names. For example, Lana Turner. Maybe you remember, or you're from the new generation. It was a great American star, very beautiful woman. We show her film Imitation of Life by Douglas Sirk. That is really very beautiful melodrama, but with a few levels. For this. And this is very good. Who was attended our opening ceremony, and we show this our classical Ukrainian movie, but unfortunately this film really needs restoration. There is some practice in the Europe. When even I'm traveling in Poland, I can see that usually something about 3-4 old movies are coming in the normal distribution in restored version. For example, I remember a few years ago, it was Трамвай бажання, казана, what is the English title?
Yeah, Tram Named Desire by Tennessee
Yes,
Williams. Yeah.
the train named Desire with Vivian Lee and Marlon Brando.
Sтрічка.
Yeah. You see, normally it's going in distribution. We have very limited distribution at all. So this is the question: how to return these classical movies? Sometimes it's a very good example for the young directors that they think sometimes that they found the new bicycle, but the bicycle was found many years ago. So I'm not the expert in restoration, but for example, I know that this is a very hard and intensive job. The same that we had this classical Italian retrospective, Rocco and his brothers. And it was a very interesting story because the original copy was shown only once on the Venice Film Festival. With a prize, not the Gold Lion, something second prize. And then Italian censor at that time carted this movie. And it was not to say that it was destroyed, but it was not the author's version. And something in the beginning of this century, they found in archive of Venice Film Festival these parts that were selected, carted and sold, and really put the new DCP, new version. Lucky that the director of camera was still alive, that it's a black and white movie, but even black and white movies, the color very important.
Andrew,
So
I very much hate to interrupt. Maybe we can quickly talk about what restoration is.
yes.
And who does that, and why do we do restoration?
Yes, this is a really expert, Iván Kozlenko, who started this job in our archive, in our Dovzhenko Center. He was attending a lot of festivals with archive movies, and he is really the man who maybe lost his teeth in this job. No, you have your teeth. Okay, very good. Please, Ivan.
Thank you. Yeah. First of all, I would tell you the story about the Ukrainian process of restoration. We started in 2012, supported by Ukrainian government, and we started with classical films from the 1960s, Ukrainian poetry film, Ukrainian poetry cinema. And the biggest part of the films to be restored was the silent films. It was our special focus on Ukrainian cinema history because these films were lacked in Ukrainian archives. I mean that Ukrainian Film Archive, Dovzhenko Center, has been established in 1994 only. And all the films produced after this year, they placed and saved in the Dovzhenko Center. But all the films which were produced before 1994, they were took out from Ukrainian film studios to Gosfilmofond of Soviet Union, which is the Soviet film archive. So. And this process started in 1938 when Gosfilmofond of Soviet Union was established in Moscow. Some copies of the film still were saved at the film studios, but as a rule there was like the second copies, not in an ideal, shape. There were no negatives, so all the negatives were took out from Ukraine, and our first aim was to put them back from Moscow, but we understood that we couldn't, pretend, we couldn't try even attempt to took our negatives back. So the only possibility was to took the so-called DAP negatives, the copy of negative. And in this way, we took back about 20 Ukrainian films from Moscow, among them The Man with a Movie Camera, Dovzhenko's films, and so on.
Sorry, Ivan, to interrupt you, because I would like maybe to explain a little bit better for our American guests what was happened after the collapse of Soviet Union. That everything was centralized in Moscow. And all now free countries, independent countries, as Baltic countries, as Georgia, and everything was there in Moscow. Our films, all negatives and everything. And it was a long discussion how to return our treasures. And only one thing that they were agree to return us positive copies, to print it. Not really to have negative and so on. And it was not to say political problem, but it was cultural problem, the same as with the Russian gas.
Yeah,
that was before for all our countries.
But it was also a political problem, because all the Soviet films are treated in Russia as Russian films. And it was our big problem how to claim that those films are Ukrainian, and how to call them actually, how to name them, whether they Ukrainian or Soviet or Russian or Soviet Ukrainian. So our decision was to name them Soviet Ukrainian films, to highlight that they are Soviet because they were the part of Soviet propaganda as a rule, but also they were Ukrainian as a part of Ukrainian culture and poetry and literature tradition. So we took out from Moscow those dub negatives, and there was the problem for us, how should we reactualize them, because all those films were about the Soviet propaganda, agitation, and so on. How to highlight those inner Ukrainian part of these films, to highlight not the propaganda part, but maybe some formalistic shapes of it. But this was our biggest problem, because as you know, 5 years ago there was the new law established in Ukraine, decommunization law, So a lot of the films should be decommunized. I mean, they should be banned. And what should you do with this part of our heritage? How should you project it? How should you promote it? This was our, big question. So what did we decide to do with those films? We decided to ask Ukrainian contemporary musicians to give those films a new, to reactualize them with means of the music. In this way, they could, they could highlight some specific components of the films. In Dovzhenko's Earth, for example, the ethnical part of the film, the traditional part of the film, and with means of music, to maybe repress the agitative or propaganda messages of the film. And as you might know, Daha Braha was asked to be the new, to make the new composition, a new score for this film, and it was like a absolutely new film, actually, because it's not about only the message which the film director put into the film, but also about the message which musician put into the film. So it's like, with the silent films, if you have different musical scores, you have different films. And this was our, I wouldn't say that it was like our know-how. of course, abroad there are a lot of the festival where this type of the reactualization of the film works, but they work not with the films which is with such powerful propaganda messages. It was our responsibility. How should we work with this film in a very tender and in a very pro-Ukrainian, let's say, manner. In this film, in this field, I mean working with the silence scored by the new musical scores. This field is very traditional, very conservative. There are two big festivals in the world which show the silent films. One is in Pordenone in Italy, which is the biggest one, specialized only on silence, and San Francisco Silent Film Festival in North America. And when we, in 2012, it was our first visit to the Pordenone Silent Film Festival, and the director of this festival, who is the English researcher, he asked us, British, yeah, he asked us, he proposed to program the Ukrainian program of the silence, because it was also the problem within the group of these researchers of silent films, that they didn't define Ukrainian and Russian Soviet films. So he asked us somehow to set this program and to highlight that there is also Ukrainian avant-garde film, not only Russian avant-garde, which is a common name for all avant-garde art in during the 1920s and 30s, but highlight the specific elements of the Ukrainian avant-garde, which is of course the Ukrainian culture tradition, the literature, and especially the poetic, how to say, work with the camera. As you know, this is the specific Ukrainian element of the film, the DOP practices. So we brought around 7 or 8 films. Among them, there were also the films of Alexander Dovzhenko, his early works, such as The Diplomatic Porch, The Arsenal. And also we brought with us the Ukrainian and also foreign musicians who scored these films live during the projection. And there was a kind of, I would say, scandal there because of 2 points. One is the music was too modern for the audience, for the researchers, who are mostly, let's say, old men.
Conservative.
Conservative, yeah. It was like too contemporary for them, because some of the musical scores were electronic ones. And the second one was that a lot of researchers didn't accept the message that those films are Ukrainian. This was this was like a scandal, because the deputy director of the festival approached me and said to me, "How dare you to name Alexander Dovzhenko, Ukrainian director? He is Russian Soviet director." And I tried to appeal to him that, you know, that he used Ukrainian and he wrote his diaries in Ukrainian, and he was very pro-Ukrainian and like one of the political even leaders of Ukraine.
It's really a lot of examples that we had. For example, the same in the Museum of Cinema in Munich. I spoke at first with their director, who is very educated and very intelligent, very interesting person. And he told me, but I don't know anything about Ukrainian films. And then he showed me his collection. There was Zigavertov. I told him, but Zigavertov is Ukrainian. It really was our job, our way to explain that these people must recognize this difference between Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah, the second example was in MoMA, in Museum of Modern Art in New York, when they also titled Alexander Dovzhenko as a Russian director, and then after I wrote them that it's wrong, they changed the title.
Stockholm and Modern Museum, I asked the director to change Malevich that he is Ukrainian, not Russian.
Yeah, but with Malevich is not so easy, you know. He could be Russian, Polish, or Ukrainian, but Alexander Dovzhenko is definitely Ukrainian. Yeah, so there was a kind of a scandal, and I understood that we here in Ukraine we established such a contemporary approach, which wasn't approached abroad. I mean, in this field, Ukraine became one of the most prominent, yeah, one of the who said, yeah, okay, we're going, who set the trends of working with the silent films. This was like a long period for us. It lasted for maybe 7 years to approach this result. But the only thing I want to add regarding the talkies. The problem in Ukraine, why we don't see the films on screens in the cinema, with the talkies, I mean, with the films produced after 1953, is the rights, because the rights holders of the films of all the films from the Soviet period are the state or state-governed Ukrainian film studios, which are, as you can understand, very conservative. They don't work with their rights. We don't allow other people or companies to work with those rights. So that's the problem. Even when we restored the films from 1960s of Ilyenko or Yershov or some other persons, we couldn't screen them any other place, only on the festivals, only as a festival screening. This is not enough. I mean, because you can project it maybe twice or 3 times, but it's not enough, and you couldn't move further with those films. This is our real big problem for Ukrainian talkies. It doesn't work with silence, because silence are in public domain in Ukraine, so you can use it anyhow and anyway as you wish. You can score it, you can colorize them, you can re-edit them, and with silence it's even more interesting, because each country where the film was distributed, and in Ukrainian films were distributed in 1920s all around the world, from America to Japan. We found one Ukrainian film in Japan, in Tokyo recently, and it's even more interesting because each country or each distributor in the certain country, they cut it, the film differently, edited the film differently, to fit it, or to fit it to the certain audience, to make it more understandable. And when you find the film in different countries, you can find the different copies of the film with the absolutely different messages, and especially with the different titles, because each intertitles. I mean, each distributor put its own intertitles into films. And recently we were lucky enough to find Ukrainian film from 1927, Kira Kiralina, in 2 different archives in Munich and in Bucharest. And there are 2 absolutely different versions, absolutely. So we try to re-edit it, since we have the plot, the script of the film, which is in our archive. We can re-edit it to make it more authentic, to make it more close to the original version of the film.
Ivan, I only propose not to have our long speeches, but involve our guests and to discuss a little bit, because I can understand they just from the plane from United States, yes? And so I see that it's maybe better now to sleep than to discuss now anyway. So let's go and really, for example, I have the question, because we know that in United States of America they have not government studios. Right. And so,
well, I mean, I actually did want to chime in on this question, because, like, for me, the question of archiving and even restoring, it's always a question of power in the way that I've become acquainted to it. So the reason is because my parents are both black independent filmmakers. My father's Ethiopian, my mother's African American. And, you know, since my first days, you know, on this earth, I've seen kind of the rigorous, you know, painstaking process that they go through to make a film. And, you know, it takes them 10, 15 years to make a single film. But they continue. And
but you made beautiful film.
Thank you. But, you know, the issue is that them and their contemporaries, other filmmakers who they come out of Africa and the United States with, other black filmmakers, are making these projects in total rejection of just European white supremacist domination in Africa and the United States. And at every stage, it is a battle against that kind of, within that type of power arrangement. And it's interesting how it's really until, you know, even in distribution, they find ways, you know, for example, when I was a child, you know, in elementary school, maybe 5, 6, 7 years old, they were self-distributing one of their biggest films, literally taking it across the country, you know, on foot, you know, to black communities around the United States, because they could not find normal means of distribution, you know what I mean? Normal business, you know, interactions. Even after they, you know, went around the world doing incredibly well, you know, winning at the biggest film festivals. But, so even in distribution, they find a way. But it's in the archival process that suddenly, you know, these people, you know, these power structures that they have been fighting against find a way to grasp, you know, to get a hand on these projects, on these films. And as an example, you know, we have there's a whole issue in this moment where we're fighting to maintain control of the films that they've made, but then find that someone has made has restored and made a copy, for example, of one of my father's films without his authorization, without his input. In the coloring, as you said, it's a black and white film, but an incredible amount of work, effort, and dedication goes into the visual structure of even a black and white film. And so the timing for a black and white film requires the input of the director and the cinematographer, you know. But, you know, another example is that there's a whole, you know, in Canada, in the United States, in Europe, there's all these different places where my father has records of just prints, you know, negatives, different elements that one day when he gets enough money, he wants to go after to retrieve from these different institutions who feel that they have a right to them, you know, even though they had no input in their creation. And in fact, they were created, in opposition to them. And so, to me, it's always a question of power, and the way my father and his, the filmmakers that we all know, the African filmmakers that we know who have come, did amazing things, and gone. Many of their films do not belong to them or their families or their estates. They belong to France or whatever, and so, to me. You're talking about like Dovchenko and the way that they tried to claim him incorrectly. I think about like, for example, the reason why this is important is because ultimately when they set out to make these films, like I said, in this cultural battlefield to tell their own stories in a place, against a institution which does not want these stories to be told, then the archival becomes the means by which, if you own these films, they can be passed down to further generations to continue the cultural battle, which our descendants will surely be involved with. And that's why it's important to claim them correctly and say, this was us, this is what we did, and this is what we were fighting against at that time. In any way that it can help you in your battle. For example, imagine, I don't know if you've seen any like this footage of like the Vietnamese as they're fighting the United States. They have their own 8mm and 60mm black and white film that they were filming, to tell their own side of the story. It's not like color, like the Americans have this high technology and shit. It's like very imperfect, but it's an archive of their own perspective on their resistance. And imagine if the United States owned that footage. Imagine if they were the ones, who had the ability to tell that story for generations to come. If it had no other way to come out into the world. My father right now, he's doing a documentary about, he's Ethiopian, like I say, he's doing a documentary about the second time the Italians tried to invade Ethiopia. In the beginning of World War II, right? Really, to us, it's one of the starting conflicts of World War II. Basically, the Italians, under Mussolini, this fascist state had the most advanced propaganda institution, Luce, in the world. Yes. They had lenses literally from here to here, to document the total destruction that they were raining down on Ethiopians, technologically.
It's really, sorry to interrupt, it's really very strange sometimes because, the political situation in Italy now is not very good, and all intelligent people, they told that it's a fascism once again, and now they have 10 times more money for culture and for cinema. It's sometimes, such propaganda things, they're working sometimes for the culture. It was very interesting. So it was very interesting that you told that really a lot of classical movies are in the private hands.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's very difficult to understand the rights, and sometimes when you try to find classical movie to show in Ukraine, you can find that distribution company, but they have no rights for Ukraine or something else, and so it's a very long process.
I mean, sorry to interrupt, but like just imagine how difficult it is to try to tell then a story about your people's side of the war, who had no technology, they have no footage. And so you have to use the footage that the Italians shot, this like propagandistic, perspective on the war to try and tell the story of this other side. So this is a film he's been editing, he's been working on for pushing 20 years now, in terms of research, collection of archival material. But not only that, it's also a battle every day to even get the rights to the archive footage from Luce and the British Pate, or because one is so expensive, it is prohibitively expensive.
Very expensive.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. So yes.
But we must ask you to beg your pardon because we really must run. We are too late in the opening of Fellini exhibition we have. And really we have here the owner, the nephew of Fellini, who really gave us her things to show here. And we have, as you know, Italian classical movies, a grandson of Rossellini, that they helped us really to bring something to show these movies. So sorry for this, everything was going on time, but because of plane and everything, we were late. And with Ivan, we must leave you in very good hands of this beautiful woman, not only beautiful, but very clever, because sometimes I don't know, with harassment in the United States, you can say that she is beautiful and maybe it will be something, I don't know, yeah, and clever. So, please continue with our guest, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would just add some words that I like very much the focus that you put our topic in. I mean the anti-colonial topic, that you treat the archive as the institution of the power. Of course, it is, and how to say, the point that Ukraine hadn't its own archive until gaining the sovereignty, until the independence shows it very, strictly. I mean, of course, those who control the power, they control the culture, of course, they control the messages, and Ukraine had a lack of the institution during the Soviet period. This is our big approach to develop our institution, because it's all about our cultural emancipation. It's the same process that you had in the US with in your black community. So thank you
very much,
Sorry
Andriy.
for-
Thank you very much, Ivan. Thank you for building that bridge. Thank you. To our two speakers. Okay. So now that we have this beautiful bridge built by Ivan and Andriy, the question to you. So we've already talked about archival films, restored films, as a means of emancipation, of reconstructing the story, or constructing it finally for the first time. What other means of what can restoration be? It's a question to both of you.
What was the last part of the question?
Oh, just what can the restored films and classics help you do? So they can help you promote, bring awareness. What else are they good for? And why are they shown, basically, today?
Yeah, I mean, I'll make it short so you can jump in there. But yeah, I think about just the ways that I study film, when whether I'm enjoying them for myself or, working towards a project and I want to look, to see what other filmmakers have done, it's incredibly important that I can move beyond the films of this generation, to go into, what people were doing in the 90s, 80s, 70s, 60s, all the way back to the 30s and 20s and before, in fact. And so so to me it's an incredible record of like just any aspect of like the filmmaking, a filmmaking that you want to study. Is an incredible record, for example, of just like directing prowess. It's very important for me, for example, like when I'm trying to like study a director, like I like to start with their first film, you know what I mean? Like if I can, their student films, and then watch them in order to kind of see how they have progressed, and how they have grown over time from project to project. It's very nice when I can go back that far, and it's funny because I say that, but I've lost my own first short film that I did in college. I was very proud of, but I wasn't even paying attention to like the importance of in our age, backing these things up and ensuring that they're safe, for the future. So like, just in just a very like technical, like studious sense, it presents those types of opportunities for folks. But
I agree, but I also just wanted to take it to kind of a more personal note. I'm an artist. I studied film, but most of my practice is in art and photography. A lot dealing with the cultural practices around hair design, braiding specifically. But I'm from Chicago in the United States, and there's a project called like the Southside Community Home Movie Project, where they collect home movies that sometimes people just find them in houses that they moved in. They also collect documents and photographs, but it's really important for these archives to be stored and organized because I'm a black person by black people, because the way things are, you know, the victor always gets to tell the story. And in the United States, as a person of color, you're not positioned as the victor. So for you to have sovereignty over archives from people that look like you, that used to live in your neighborhood, especially when they try to tell you that everybody was poor and down, and then you can see varieties of footage of people that live varieties of lifestyles. So cinematic archives are very important, but also personal archives are important, because those archives can later become part of a greater documentary that talks about, that just proves that you were here, your people were here, your people lived a good life. You know, all these things are really important, I think, and often overlooked.
How much impact did, because you do art and then you do film, which is art as well, how much impact did archives and film classics, so anything, you know, that was back from the time and restored and kept and preserved, how much impact did it have on your work? Maybe specific examples. Is a question to both.
Yeah, so my film Residue, which is here. If you've seen it, thank you. If you want to see it, it'll be playing again tomorrow. The name itself, Residue, is really kind of a signal to the things that people leave behind, you know. And I think that residue specifically is an important way to name that, because, you know, it is kind of the imperfect way that we archive our lives when we don't have the power and scope to do it in this very, you know, institutional kind of way. So what that looks like is often, like Shani was saying, a couple photographs, a couple home videos, you know, some furniture, some debt, you know what I mean? All kinds of things that you leave behind, which, you know, to me, when you take them all together, you know what I mean, and really start to put them together with care, you get an archive, you know, you get a real archive of a life lived, an incredible life lived, you know what I mean, especially with black folks in the United States, you know, in total resistance to some of the most oppressive kind of, you know, conditions that, you know, that anyone could imagine. And I think that that to me is what Residue is. It's just you know, imperfectly, you know what I mean, black folks leave behind something, you know, before they die, you know, and just in the course of living their lives. And it's important for this next generation, especially of filmmakers and storytellers, to come behind and to really, with care and love, you know, kind of collect the residual, you know, artifacts of their existence into some type of monument, you know. And so my neighborhood in Washington, D.C., where I'm from, is being, you know, completely, I don't know if y'all familiar with gentrification and, you know, all that. I'm sure you are, but it's being completely wiped out. And, you know, black folks are being completely wiped out of Washington, D.C. and every other black city in the United States, so that this new kind of gentrifying class of well-to-do white folks can enter right into that space as if nothing ever happened.
They went to the suburbs, but now the suburbs went back into the city.
Yeah, it's like a whole wave. So Residue was my attempt to capture and archive our community before it's too late, you know what I mean? And if you see the film, you kind of see that in every kind of aspect of the film, and the visuals, the sound. You know, much of it is not what we shot during production. A lot of it is archival footage, photography, things about, you know, it may not even have any sense. It was just me wanting to put it into the film. You know, a lot of the actors were chosen. They're my friends and family, and I wanted to just have them on camera, you know. In many ways, it was an excuse to document the neighborhood before it was too late. So that's kind of where Residue came. Oh, have I been low on volume? I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
All right, cool.
You're good. Shani?
Some photographic archives that impact my work are the works specifically of James Barner and J.D. Ojikere. I think he's Nigerian. James Barner, I want to say he may be Nigerian as well, but both of them are photographers. And J.D. Okai Ajikere, he did a whole series kind of documenting traditional coiffure in Nigeria, different parts of West Africa. So all of these really fantastic braided hairstyles for a number of different cultural occasions. He documented them over the course of years. You've probably seen his work if you Google like African braiding. I'm sure if you see an old black and white photograph, it'll be one of his photos. But James Barner, he was a principal photographer for this magazine called Drum Magazine, which was just so, the style of the way that he captured African people was just really forward at the time. I think he was shooting in like the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And it was just a way that he captured them that I hadn't really seen before. And I'm just really inspired. Also, the way that his photos were colored, the color in them is just so vibrant and alive. And so a lot of my work is black and white, but I'm shooting in color now. But I think that it was just really important for me to emphasize the character within the style that I'm doing. So like, just for me personally. But speaking of film, because this is about cinema, I don't want to get in trouble here because I'm not exactly sure who the director is, but I saw a film called, it translates to Daisies. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's about two young ladies and they decide that the world is going to shit basically, so they're going to do what they want to do and live their best life. And it's a real wild movie. They do stuff like eat like a crazy, like gorge all this food and do all this weird luxury stuff. But I thought that movie was really interesting because I had never seen a movie from the Soviet region, I think, prior to seeing that film. And I don't know, I was just really inspired by it. I thought that it was like kooky in a really interesting and unique way. I thought the voice and the kind of commentary on women kind of going against the norm of what their life should be or what's considered like acceptable and normal was really cool. And just stylistically, something about the audio, especially that opening scene. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Okay, great. Because I'm like, am I explaining it right? Because it's all a memory now, but it's a memory that sticks with me because I really like that film.
Okay. I think we can wrap up. Thank you for this very compact talk, but thank you for sharing very personal accounts.
Yeah, for sure.
And unexpected angles.
Sorry we came late. I also wanted to apologize. I know our airplane, our pilot ruined everything. So sorry about that.
Circumstances, it's fine because we're gonna have you tomorrow as well.
Yeah.
You're gonna be our final masterclass speaker tomorrow.
Nice.
From the 50th Molodість Film Festival. It's half a century. It's a lot of time.
Wow.
So, yeah, you have a big role. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Окей, друзі, дякую, що були з нами. Ми зустрінемося з вами завтра о 10:00. В нас буде, повторююся, 3 дуже цікавих майстер-класи. У нас буде Кшиштоф Занусі з самого початку, у нас буде Мераві Ґеріма на кінець. І я дуже вас запрошую відвідати останній день цього сезону цієї секції індустрії. Дякую дуже.